So we are going to be talking about science communication for researchers today. My name is Tanya Dimitrova, and I am the founder and managing editor of Science Journal for Kids. We are a small nonprofit organization based in Texas, and what we do is we take an academic paper like the one you see here on the left, published in a peer-reviewed journal, and we translate it, we convert it into a kid's version like the one you see here on the right. We've done this to nearly 200 papers already from different disciplines. But before I actually dive into the communications part, I wanted to share a little bit more about my background because it is somewhat different from other marine biology live speakers, and it informs everything I know about communication. So in my early 20s, I spent a few years working in military medicine. I didn't only protect the doctors from perceived and actual enemies and threats. I actually worked with them on emergency cases. And after I left that, I went to University of London to do a bachelor's in environmental science. Then I switched gears a bit and I went for my master's to University of California in Berkeley to study science journalism, particularly on environmental topics. And up here on the right, you can see me interviewing a farmer in Mexico. I was worried about arsenic pollution in the groundwater in his region. Then I switched gears once again and became a science teacher in Texas. And down here you can see my class. And then after all that, 6 years ago, I founded Science Journal for Kids. So looking at these different careers and career shifts, Army medic, environmental scientist, journalist, science teacher, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense going forward, but it actually makes all the sense in the world going backwards, because only after all this, working as a science teacher, I could realize the gap that my students faced, in access to relevant, up-to-date scientific information, because the most recent discoveries were only published in peer-reviewed journals. They would take, say, 10 years to make it to the textbook. By then, of course, they'd be outdated. And not to mention, the difficulty in reading academic English, even if you had access to the subscription-based journal. So I also realized that I had the capacity and the professional experience necessary to fill this gap. So I started adapting biomedical and environmental papers for my own students in anatomy class and environmental science class. And that's how Science Journal for Kids began. Today, our website does have about 1 million readers per year. And most of those are science teachers who actually download our resources and use it in their classroom for their own students. So the actual number of readers is much greater. So we are going to talk about communicating science to kids and teenagers. That's our primary topic, but I wanted to make a stop at a slightly different topic, communicating science to adults. Some of the lessons for communicating science to kids may be relevant and useful, but communicating with adults is a lot different, and it's much more difficult because I don't need to tell you this, we live in a global society that's so polarized, and a lot of people perceive science as politically jaded and consider even a matter of self-respect to hold on to their pre-existing beliefs, even in the face of data coming into the live stream. So adults are a difficult audience. I didn't say impossible, of course, but they are difficult. Still, I have a couple of tips. First, let's talk about authority and liberalism. It's important to realize that we live in a world in which, for better or worse, science and scientists no longer have automatic authority, even on topics that are completely within their area of expertise. there are plenty of examples. So think about the vaccine safety debate. Why is it a debate even? But the average person who's interested in the topic will give as much weight to the words of an epidemiologist with a 40-year-long professional career in treating and preventing infectious diseases and developing vaccines. So that would weigh pretty much as much as the opinion of a worried mom who read something on the internet. So that's a fact. I don't like it either. And I know it's frustrating to experts, and it will probably have serious negative consequences for humanity, but it's a fact. And we have to take this into account in our communication. So it would be a fundamental mistake for any expert to talk down to lay people about any topic. And even if that kind of attitude is unintentional and even unrealized, people are so very sensitive to perceived hierarchies that you really cannot afford to do that. It's bound to backfire. So instead, I have 3 tips here. So first, be patient and willing to always explain your research and your understanding of the data without questioning people's right to question it. This is so crucial. And as long as you have a willing audience sitting there listening to you, take this opportunity and spend the time. It's not a waste of time. Just patiently walk them through the way things work. Don't consider it just an added bonus activity. It's not. It's a crucial part of the job. It's part of your job description as a working scientist. Second is having empathy and starting with a place of a common ground. And there are plenty of places of common ground between us. We all share our basic humanity. We all care about the well-being of our children and our families. We all want to live a life free of suffering. So it wasn't by accident that I used the vaccine debate example. Now, I am not an epidemiologist, but I do happen to have, let's say, a better understanding of the topic than most people around me. And yet I constantly run into this situation where a fellow mom at the playground where I take my daughter, would proudly state, my children are not vaccinated. I don't want to put poison in them. MMR vaccine causes autism. I swear at that moment, I want to punch her in the face. I'm probably being overly honest, but I do. I have such a strong visceral reaction to misinformation on any scientific topic, especially on vaccines, such a big topic right now, even with COVID-19 vaccines. Yet, would that help anyone? If I actually punched her in the face, would it help her? Would it persuade anyone to do anything? Would it make her and my child any safer from infectious diseases? I don't think so. So instead of that, I take a deep breath and start with stating a fact. You're a mom and I'm a mom too. And I know you're worried about your child. I'm worried about mine too. So let me tell you some of the things that I'm worried about. There are these infectious diseases which can cripple and even kill our children and so on. Take the conversation from that point forward, from that common ground that we share. The third tip related to this is using personal example. So right here, I have a picture of Dr. Fauci getting the COVID-19 shot, which is great. And I think all scientists should think of analogous examples from their own field to demonstrate, to share publicly, to show by example that we all follow our own advice, and that we truly believe in it in that way. And I think that's an important step that we all can take. The final thing I'm going to say is actually the most important thing in this realm. So when you are having a conversation, a discussion, a debate with someone, don't try to persuade them, the person you're talking to. Instead, try to persuade the audience, the people who are listening to the conversation. And believe me, there are always people listening to the conversation. At the playground, when I'm talking to this mom who may be obstinate and might not be interested in nuanced argument and data and anything that would contradict her opinion, there are other moms who are listening, okay? And they might benefit from this information and from this conversation more than you actually can imagine. So, your time spending in communicating research is not wasted and may still go a long way, even if by the end of the conversation you feel completely drained and frustrated and failed, okay? Don't pass judgment on yourself like this. So I hope I haven't despaired you too much by now, but let's move on to a brighter topic, communicating science to kids. And kids, fortunately, are not at all like adults in that way. They are curious, open-minded, and impressionable. Just think about tobacco companies who have known and used this for a long time. So, joking. There are three things we're going to talk about. First, engaging your audience. Second, being inspiring. And third, using clear language and just being clear in your communication. So let's talk about each of these in turn. Okay, so this is a quote that I love. I read it somebody told it to me in my first year of teaching, and it completely changed my entire concept of what the role of a teacher is. Okay, the problem with education is that we want students to answer questions they did not ask themselves. So our job as teachers or as communicators is not to just pour information in. No, they have to be asking the questions themselves first in order to be receptive to it. And then, of course, the question becomes, well, how do we get them to ask the right questions? And unfortunately, there is no universal answer to that that I can provide. But it's important to always keep this initial step in mind. This is key. The students have to be engaged with the topic first. And I'm going to share three good examples. So here on the left, you can see the way one of our research papers starts. It's a shark conservation paper that Lois is currently working on from the David Sims Lab. And it starts like this. Many people are scared of sharks, but did you know that falling coconuts are actually more deadly to humans than sharks? Each year, tens of millions of sharks are caught by fishing ships. So actually, sharks should be afraid of us. And instead of fearing them, we should protect them from us. So this whole imagery, this visual idea of a coconut falling on your head versus a shark biting you in the ocean, it's very powerful. It really puts the reader on the inside the situation, right? And they start caring about it a little bit more. And then that's a surprising factoid. I mean, you don't know of anyone who got killed by a falling coconut, but is that really true? Are coconuts that dangerous? Sharks are not dangerous? What? So they start asking all these questions, right? This is exactly where you want to be. The second example is this visual data from NOAA showing the Arctic ice, changes in Arctic ice over the last 20 years. And every time I start teaching climate change or albedo or climate feedbacks or anything like that, I always start with this video, just putting it up on the board, kind of orienting the students geographically, where they're located, what's happening, what's the legend showing, what do the different colors mean? without any sound, without any other explanation. I just let them watch for a minute. I'm going to let you watch now too. So, and I pause here. And by that point, I'm being bombarded by questions like, wait, miss, what's happening here? Why is it changing so much? Where did all the ice go? Why did it flow away? What does the white mean? What does the blue mean? What's causing this? And this is exactly the point where their mind is open and you can start really talking about this topic. They have asked the questions you want them to answer. The third example I'm going to give is visual aids. So whether you are in a classroom or in front of a live audience, or you're at home doing a webinar, it's visual aids go a long way in engaging your audience. So anything that's possible to touch, to really put in your hands. So let's say if I was doing a presentation on plastic pollution in the ocean, definitely has some plastic pollution, you know, get the students to go in and dig out some plastic pollution and maybe look at the different codes down here. Just having visual aids really, really helps engaging them. Okay, moving on. The next tip is, well, you should be inspiring. It could be a tall order. I imagine it sounds a bit scary, but you should. You should inspire your audience. You should leave a memory. You should make them like you. No, you should make them love you. And remember from school, from your time in school, you know, the facts that you learned, gone. And you know, they've changed already. So much, things have been updated so much. You have to check it online. You have to double check it just to make the facts don't matter. What you remember is this inspiring teacher that really got you excited about the topic, that left a lasting memory in your head. So right here, I have the example of a young researcher from University of Texas in San Antonio, who's doing research on chemical research on extracting a compound from a particular plant that is used in anti-malarial drugs. Super cool story. And the story about her work is exactly as important as her own story of doing this research. So in the article, we included pictures of her working with the different instruments and so on. So when you're speaking to an audience, when you're trying to communicate, don't try to sanitize your communication, making it objective or impersonal. On the contrary, do share your frustrations, your challenges, your moments of joy during the process. This is as much a part of the research process in a young person's mind as the actual methodology and results and data. Okay, so do make this a large part of your talk. Don't think that it's not that important. Okay, so let's talk about clarity now and making your explanations as accurate and understandable as possible without dumbing them down. So I have used a number of examples here. I'm going to walk you through it. Bad, good. Okay. The trees were watered twice a week. Please don't avoid using passive voice. It's unhelpful. So we watered the trees twice a week. Next thing, palm plantations came from recent deforestation. Wait, did they really come if you think about this? No. Who acted? The farmers have cleared forest quite recently to grow oil palms. The next thing, the first thing the cat did was to jump on the windowsill. So this is a reverse structure. The subject must be first. The subject must come first in the sentence. So the cat first jumped on the windowsill and then snuck in through the crack. Okay, let's talk about length of sentences. In the future, palm plantations are likely to emerge in Africa and South America, in addition to continued development in Indonesia, Malaysia, and New Guinea, where all of these regions have high biodiversity. The sentence is entirely too long, so you can break it down at least three. Farmers will likely clear more areas in Asia, Africa, and South America. That will harm many species, especially in Indonesia, Malaysia, and New Guinea. All of these areas have very high, very biodiverse nature. And in general, try to make written communication as brief as possible. So your audience have a limited attention span. And especially after you've added all the personal details, you really don't have a whole lot of space to work with. So try to really think, what are the most important things that you're trying to communicate? The most important things about your research, the most important things about your methodology, okay? And really just give the essence. Okay, continuing on. We extracted the DNA from powder generated from these samples and prepared DNA libraries for each individual. A DNA library is a set of DNA fragments or sections that represent the genes of an organism. So this is a bit too long, kind of abstract, and potentially irrelevant, really. Again, try to figure out what is the essence of what you're saying. So how about we ground down small pieces of their bones into powder and extracted the DNA. Okay, we used different computational methods to analyze the ancient DNA. Computational methods is very abstract and very jargony and should be avoided at all costs. Instead, we analyzed it with a computer program. Bam, everybody knows what a computer program is. Next, we compared samples taken from people from different regions in the Caribbean. We identified major groups of people based on shared ancestry. Shared ancestry is a very abstract concept. Let's try a different route. We compared human DNA from different sites. We grouped all the people in 7 family groups. A little bit better. Next, another aspect of our research was gathering archaeological evidence. Aspect of our research, really poor expression, should be avoided. Just instead of that, say, we also gathered archaeological evidence. Buried tools and buildings, immediately followed by a concrete example, things that they could visualize, or even you could visualize for them using a photograph. We studied the cultural development of the people in the Caribbean. Cultural development, we may use it every day as a term, but it's abstract. We studied their culture and how it changed over time is a more direct way of saying it. And finally, we looked at the change of technology or tools in the region over time. This can happen in 3 ways: independent invention, diffusion of ideas, movement of people who carry the new technology. Again, impersonal, who's doing the actual act here? So instead of that, we wanted to know how and why people changed the tools they used over time. A, they discovered new tools themselves. B, got the idea from somewhere else. C, newcomers showed them new types of tools. So all of these are just examples, and know that there are online editors like Hemingway app here, which is free and really high quality, where you can run your text through it. It can tell you what the reading level currently is. It can make suggestions on how and where to improve it to bring the reading level down. So I do recommend using something like that. Okay, a word about jargon. So jargon is not completely off limits to you in your talk or in your communication, as long as you make a point about it, about explaining it. So say you're doing a talk about fish migration, and you want the students to understand the term anadromous fish. Okay, then spend some time on this word, okay? Pronounce it slowly, help them pronounce it slowly. If you know a mnemonic, a way to remember it, share that. Explain where this weird word comes from. You know, ana is, it comes from Greek, it means up, just like in the word analogy, which means higher level of thinking, okay? Up thinking something, analogy. And then dromos is also a Greek word. It comes from, it's the same word that we see in aerodrome. It means walk or a path, okay? Just like airplanes are using the aerodrome to take off on their path. So anadromos means up, walking up. So the fish are walking up the stream. Bam! Your audience has this, now has this secret word, this secret nugget of knowledge that they gained, and they could show off with it in front of their parents, or just be proud that they understood this. Okay, obviously there is a limit to how many jargon or new terms you can introduce to your audience in a particular moment, but again, think about the essence of what you're doing. What do you want them to go away with? Okay, let's talk about figures now. Speaking of analogies, this is a great way, a great example of the power of visual explanation. So this is from a paper we adapted, the one I showed you in the beginning about environmental DNA. And so we want here, we want to explain what's the difference between a conserved region of the DNA code and a variable region. And we use an analogy with barcodes in a store, right? So the conserved region, the first part is the same for all mammals, just like the conserved region of the barcode is the same for all juices. But then the variable part, the end part of the DNA is different, just like California sea lion is different from the humpback whale, analogous to the orange juice being different from an apple juice carton. And then if the conserved part of the DNA changes, instead of mammal, we have a crustacean, or instead of a juice, we have a fruit or a vegetable. Okay. So visual explanations, visual aids like that can be immensely powerful, and do use it in your advantage, okay? When you're trying to clearly explain things. Next example. So here we have on the left, you can see the original figure, the results graph from a paper we adapted. On the right, you can see our adaptation. And first of all, there are even two graphs originally. You know, again, we limited it to just one. And notice that even on this graph here on the left, the top part of the graph, it shows two different pieces of information, two different data sets. One shows total species richness. The other one shows cumulative number of species, okay? We got rid of one of them because you should really try to convey a single message with your graph, okay? Don't try to put too much into it, making it too busy, too visually unattractive. I mean, graphs can be, frankly, they could be appalling. They could really kind of make someone avert their eyes if they're too busy like that. So, you know, just keeping the essence, maybe using some color coding, and walking the reader through the graph in the caption. So explaining, you know, this part of the graph shows this, you know, this is an axis. Maybe you have to start from there. You know, what, not only what is shown on X and Y axes, but what is an axis in a graph, you know. So really spend some time and walk your reader through the visual explanation that you've prepared in that way. Well, we're close to the end of the talk. I just want to urge you now to take or suggest 4 different actions that you could take. First, how about you give a talk at school about your research? It's actually a perfect moment to do that. Even if you're not physically at school and the schools are not open, you could do this online. Well, how do you go about doing that? Well, you could, if you're young enough and you've been to school recently, you could actually contact your own science teacher from back in the day and offer to give a presentation to your students. Teachers are actually looking for ways to break up the curriculum, make it more interesting, more personal. Having guest speakers is a great way to do that, especially if you really make it inspiring for the students. No pressure. So that's one way. Contact a teacher that you know. Or if you have school age children, contact their teacher and offer to do a talk. Or if all that fails, just literally cold call or email a teacher of the school just down the street. You can talk about your research, and then you can even share some of the articles on our website, which are directly related to your research, as a follow-up reading for students. That's really appreciated by teachers. Second thing I recommend is following us on social media. We do post regularly about volunteering opportunities in the journal. And from time to time, we post about job searches that we're doing. So we're hiring people. We normally hire people from our volunteer pool. So that would be a good place to start. Then you could have your own research adapted by Science Journal for Kids. And we can talk about this a bit later, about the process and the terms and conditions. And finally, you can participate in other inspiring and useful events organized by the Marine Biological Association, such as the current one. So thank you all for your attention. I'm going to pause here and open up for questions.